Hi everyone, welcome to my Smart Learning YouTube channel. I hope you can make good use of my channel to learn more new knowledge and become a smarter and happier person. Since I have spent lots of time and effort in producing this kind of educational videos, I will ask for your donation, and I'm now accepting donation through PayPal or Venmo. My PayPal name is paypal.me/gracef327. Or you can Venmo me. My Venmo is at Grace_Rainier. Thank you very much for your support. Today, we will continue to explore the topic of globalization, in particular, the topic about political globalization. Political globalization. Domestic political activities were used to be more confined within national borders than economic activity. But under the influence of globalization, political activities have increasingly taken place at the international level. There is the growth of an international political system that involves the nation-states, international organizations, international non-governmental organizations, regional governmental organizations, and social movement organizations. As many enterprises and organizations have the ability to plan and conduct activities on a global scale, the power of individual government to regulate them is relatively weakened. Besides, owing to the increase in international activities, the international arena has become an important international platform for political activity. The policies of individual countries are often dictated by international organizations. Under globalization, local politics is no longer just the result of negotiation of local interest groups. The political activities of individual countries are increasingly constrained by global norms. The biggest influence on local politics can be said to be the globalization of political organizations. The importance of international globalizations has greatly increased in the 20th century. International organization. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were only 37 international organizations, IGO, and by the end of the 20th century, there were close to 300. In addition, the number of international non-governmental organizations increased substantially during the 20th century. In 1909, there were only 371 internationally recognized IGNOs. By the year 2000, there were nearly 25,000. International organizations like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization from time to time will intervene in the policy for formulation of individual countries. For example, in the 1980s, many South American countries and African countries were subject to the conditional loan policies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These countries had to implement a series of government reforms and market opening measures. Regional intergovernmental organizations like the European Union, the North American Treaty Organization, and NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, also have important political influences on member countries. International conventions. International conventions are also another important development in the globalization of political norms. The more common ones are environmental protection, human rights, and war crimes, etc., which impose certain constraints on government of various countries. The international political arena will greatly increase as more and more international affairs are discussed and negotiated on the global political platform, and governments of all countries are involved in global political decision making. International politics has transcended the traditional so-called foreign affairs category and developed towards a global governance structure. Global issues, including economic development, trade, medical care, military affairs, have become important topics in multilateral negotiations. Whether it is regional such as APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, EU, European Union, ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or globals such as the United Nations, G8, G8 Summit, OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. In these structures, the agendas discussed are global and transnational issues. Governments of all countries have the opportunity to exert certain influence in international affairs by participating in international political negotiations. Global climate change. In the face of adverse effects of global climate change with rising sea level, extreme weather events, wildfires, and droughts, to food insecurity and health impacts, it is an international agenda that requires countries around the world to work together to combat this global crisis. The latest Global Climate Summit conducted by the United Nations was in Glasgow, Scotland, in November 2021. With the participation of nearly 200 nations, agreed to accelerate the fight against the climate crisis and to commit to tougher climate pledges. The conference has made some significant achievements of new pledges on methane gas, deforestation, coal financing, completion of long-range rules on carbon trading, and a notable US-China deal. More than 100 countries have now joined a US and EU-led coalition to cut 30% of the methane gas emission by 2030 from 2020 levels, an important move towards limiting one of the major culprits of climate change. There is also a final deal among 200 nations for the first time targeting fossil fuels as the key driver of climate change, and the US-China pledge to slow climate change. Even though scholars and climate experts have claimed that whether we can save humanity from the worst consequence of climate change is very much dependent on countries put their agreements into action, this is still a good signal of global collaborative efforts to target an international climate crisis. Globalization of the COVID-19 pandemic. The outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic is a global health issue affecting 228 countries and territories. It was believed that the new strain of coronavirus was originated in bats or pangolins. The first transmission to humans was in Wuhan, China. After that, the virus has mostly spread through person-to-person contact. The World Health Organization declared a public health emergency of international concern on January the 30th, 2020, and a pandemic on March 11, 2020. As of June 29, 2020, the pandemic had caused more than 545 million cases and 6.33 million deaths. It is one of the deadliest diseases in human history. There is an unparalleled international scientific response to understand viral genetics, immunopathogenesis, and therapeutic strategies. Public and private funders across the world have launched a number of initiatives to support multidisciplinary projects addressing the virus infections. Collaboration between international scientists, industry, healthcare community, and government policy makers are encouraged to facilitate a well-integrated COVID-19 response. Scientists all over the world welcome the new form of open science communication and data sharing, which is crucial in moving COVID-19 research forward. On May 4, 2020, the European Union and the World Health Organization organized the Coronavirus Global Response Pledging Event, and 7.4 billion euro was raised from donors worldwide to be used for developing, producing, and deploying a vaccine for all. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, in the UK, the British government invested £20 million to fund new studies against coronavirus. Since the US biotech firm Moderna announced plans to launch vaccine trials in humans, the US government has invested $483 million to scale up that company's vaccine production. The US National Institute of Health, together with other government organizations and biotech companies, helped to set up a partnership to coordinate efforts against the COVID-19 pandemic and give priority to the development of an efficient vaccine and therapeutic drugs. The WHO was supposed to be the international health organization in leading and coordinating countries together to combat the dissemination of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it was criticized for its lack of leadership and its failure to address this global health crisis. On February 29, 2019, the virus has spread across 53 countries with more than 6,000 confirmed cases and 86 deaths outside China. The WHO Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, praised China for its efforts in containing the spread of disease. On January 23, 2020, COVID-19 cases jumped from 45 to 500 cases in week in China. Many health experts had raised the concern of a possible global outbreak. Tedros stated in a press conference that there was no need to declare a public health emergency of international concern. Tedros visited China on January 28, 2020, and he praised China for its commitment to transparency after the trip, which was in contrast to human rights groups criticizing China for its censorship measures. As the world's development is increasingly become more interconnected and interdependent, the outbreak of the COVID-19 global pandemic is a clear indication that countries can't live by itself, but have to work collaboratively on a global scale to deal with international problems. Here comes with the concept of global governance. Global governance is the way how global affairs can be managed. As there is no global government, global governance typically involves a range of actors, including states, as well as regional and international organizations. However, a single organization may nominally be given the lead role on an issue. For example, the World Trade Organization in world trade affairs. Thus, global governance is thought to be an international process of consensus forming, which generates guidelines and agreements that affect national governments and international corporations. Examples of such consensus would include World Health Organization's policies on health issues. Global governance thus aims in working through the myriad of issues within international system. Thakur and Weiss further explain that there is no government for the world, yet on any given day, mail is delivered across borders. People travel from one country to another country via a variety of transport modes. Goods and services are freighted across land, air, sea, and cyberspace, and a whole range of other cross-border activities take place in reasonable expectation of safety and security for the people, groups, firms, and governments involved. Disruption and threats are rare. This immediately raised a puzzle. How is the world governed, even in the absence of a world government, in order to produce norms, codes of conduct, and regulatory, surveillance, and compliance instruments? How are values allocated quasi-authoritatively for the world and as accepted as such without a government to rule the world? The answer lies in global governance. It is the sum of laws, norms, policies, and institutions that define, constitute, and mediate relations between citizens, societies, markets, and states in the international system. The wielder and objects of the exercise of international public power. The concept of global governance helps to explain how the world of different countries can work cooperatively as a single entity to combat global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. However, there are some drawbacks within the system, as amplified and identified by the World Health Organization, such as the jurisdictional gap between the increasing need of global governance in many areas, such as health, and the lack of an authority with the power or jurisdiction to take action. The incentive gap between the need for international cooperation and the motivation to undertake it. The incentive gap is said to be closing as globalization provides increasing impetus for countries to cooperate. However, there are concerns that as Africa lags further behind economically, its influence on global governance processes will diminish. The participation gap. The participation gap, which refers to the fact that International cooperation remains primarily the affair of governments, leaving civil society groups on the fringe of policy making. On the other hand, globalization of communication is facilitating the development of global civil societies movements. The power distribution gap among the different countries. Some countries exercise more influence in the global affairs than other countries. For better or for the worse, the world needs more leadership and good influence from the United States. But now China seems to dictate the global agenda, as the case of the COVID-19 pandemic and the malfunction of the World Health Organization in working for the health benefit for all the people in the world, then just become China's political puppet. Global governance then is aimed at negotiating responses to problems that affect more than one state or region. Global governance can be considered the response to issues arising from the world's increasing interconnectivity, and the need for and importance of a process to designate laws, rules, or regulations governing political, economic, social, and cultural issues, and which are to be used on a global scale.